If your wife walked out the door at 10 p.m., would you be worried? I'm not, because I can just switch on the local news to see her. My wife, Mandy White, co-anchors the evening news on one of the top stations in Pittsburgh. Smart, stunning, and with a charisma that lights up the screen, Mandy's already a big name locally, and folks say she's destined for a larger market, maybe even Dallas or Los Angeles. There's even talk of a potential offer in New York, the ultimate goal for anchors. I'm Elliot Foster, and Mandy kept her maiden name for her professional career, as many anchors do, to maintain that clear boundary between their on-air persona and private life. I'm so lucky to be her husband, and I feel that every day. We met as freshmen at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. She was studying broadcasting, and I was deep into marketing. It was at a fraternity party that I first saw her, tall, blonde, captivating. Though I was never a model or an athlete, I was outgoing, and to my surprise, we clicked. We dated steadily, with a few bumps along the way, even breaking up briefly for 2 weeks. I remember running across campus to win her back, only to see her running toward me. It was like something out of a movie. By our senior year, we were deeply in love, engaged, and living together off campus. But we held off on the wedding until after graduation so she could have the big celebration her family wanted. We married just a week after graduating, in a small chapel on campus. Mandy landed a weekend weather anchor position in Augusta, not a major role, but it was her first foot in the door. Meanwhile, I started at a small ad agency to gain experience. Mandy's career took off quickly. Within a year, she was offered a reporting job at a major station in Columbia. We moved there, and I got hired at a larger ad firm. Mandy thrived, eventually moving into a weekend anchor position and then a full-time co-anchor spot for the evening news. Her pregnancy announcement boosted her popularity, and when our daughter, Emma, was born, it was practically a community event. The station even ran a short series on Mandy's journey into motherhood, and she later won a regional Emmy for it. Eventually, she was offered a co-anchor position at Pittsburgh's top news station, KTR, which we knew could open doors to even greater opportunities. The move from Columbia to Pittsburgh wasn't easy. I was settled in my work and loved our life down south. But with some guidance from colleagues and support from the station, I found a good position at a top ad agency in Pittsburgh. The station's management even connected us with a top-notch realtor who helped us find a beautiful home in Greenfield, along with a great daycare for Emma. Surprisingly, we adjusted to our new life faster than expected. Our day-to-day routine isn't exactly typical. I wake up early, make breakfast, and head out to work, leaving Mandy and Emma still fast asleep. Mandy spends her mornings with Emma before dropping her off at Mrs. Hanley's, a wonderful woman who runs a small daycare that introduces kids to basic concepts they'll encounter in kindergarten. I pick up Emma after work, handle dinner, bath time, and bedtime stories before I finally get to unwind on the couch. Mandy's schedule, though, is grueling. She's at the station by 3 p.m. to prepare for the evening broadcast at 6 p.m. and again at 10 p.m. Lately, her boss, Jason Fields, has started running meetings after the late show to review the broadcast, which means she's home even later. The competition in Pittsburgh's media market is intense, and I understand as well as anyone why ratings matter. But as her husband, I miss our time together. We're both working long hours, and sometimes, it feels like we're more like friendly roommates than a married couple. We try to reserve weekends for family time, but with Mandy's public appearances, our schedules rarely align. I know it's tough for her too. Whenever I bring it up, she avoids the conversation. It's complicated. We talked about these challenges before we married, and I agreed to support her career, especially given that so many of our friends also juggle demanding jobs. Still, the frustration eventually built up. Over lunch one day, I ended up confiding in my friend Bill Corbin, who works as the media director at my agency. Bill's a family man with a daughter just a bit older than Emma, and we've grown close over time. As we talked about life and family, I suddenly found myself saying, "Man, I wish I had what you have." Bill looked at me, concerned. "Things rocky, Elliot?" Before I knew it, I was spilling everything out. "I'm married to one of the most incredible women in the news industry," I admitted, "but I hardly see her. Her fans probably see her more often than I do." Bill shook his head sympathetically. "Man, that's tough, Elliot. Why not plan a getaway, just the two of you? I'm sure Emma would love to spend time with your folks for a few days." I thought about it and said, "Well, I've considered it, but Mandy says Jason Fields is pressuring them to keep ratings high." He's worried even a small break might hurt their viewership in ways they can't recover from. Listen, Bill replied, I know Jason. He's ambitious, sure, but he's also reasonable. Why don't you have a word with him? Maybe he can help arrange some time for you and Mandy. I don't know, Bill, I sighed. Mandy would go ballistic if she found out I talked to her boss about this. She doesn't need to know, Bill suggested. Jason's coming by the agency tomorrow for a meeting, you could catch him afterward. I don't like the idea of mixing my personal concerns with work, I admitted. Don't be silly, it's just an informal chat after a preliminary meeting. It's a perfect chance, Bill encouraged. That evening, Mandy got home even later than usual. She didn't wake me from the couch, where I had drifted off, and I found myself crawling into bed next to her sometime in the early morning, regretting that I didn't even get to say goodnight. Determined to change things, I kept an eye on the conference room the next day as Jason's meeting ended. I waved him over, and he looked cheerful. Hey, Elliot. How's my favorite news anchor's husband? He joked. Hey, Jason. Got a minute? I asked. Of course. What's on your mind? He responded. I took a deep breath and said, I need you to give Mandy a little breathing room. The workload is wearing her down, and it's tough on both of us. Jason's expression shifted to concern. Has she mentioned anything to you? No, she loves it, I replied. But honestly, it's me that's struggling. I hardly see her anymore. He relaxed a bit, chuckling. You knew the job was demanding when you married her, Elliot. True, but all these extra appearances and late-night meetings are cutting into our time, I explained. All right, I get it. Maybe we've gone a bit overboard, Jason admitted. I'll see if we can ease up on the appearances, and you can forget about the post-show meetings. They've actually been unnecessary since the last ratings update. Have you seen them? We're way ahead of the competition, and management's thrilled. With a reassuring pat on the back, he headed off to his next meeting. After he left, I checked the ratings myself, noticing the latest numbers were indeed released a month ago. If Jason hadn't held a meeting since then, why was Mandy still coming home so late? The thought unsettled me, even though I quickly pushed aside the idea that she might be hiding something. I knew Mandy loved me and wouldn't risk our marriage. There could be plenty of other explanations, extra fan mail, some late-night wind-down time, but those thoughts didn't bring much comfort. Later, Bill stuck his head into my office. Hey, I saw you talking with Jason. Did you get any relief? I hesitated. I'm not sure yet, Bill. I guess I won't know until I speak to Mandy. He gave me a puzzled look but didn't press further. All right, Elliot. Let me know if there's anything I can do. The rest of the day, I went through the motions, but my mind was on Jason's comments and Mandy's reasons for her late hours. I considered confronting her but worried I'd end up looking foolish if there was a simple explanation. Bringing up an affair without cause could damage our relationship, but doing nothing felt weak. By the time I left work to pick up Emma, I was no closer to a solution. Thankfully, my little girl's boundless energy took my mind off things for a while. That night, as I read her to sleep, she clung to me, sensing my unease. Once she drifted off, I felt tears in my eyes, imagining how devastating a divorce would be for her. I stayed up, flipping channels until the news came on. Watching Mandy on the screen reminded me of how much I loved her, and I reassured myself that she'd never betray me. But when she finally walked through the door after midnight, her excuse made me pause. Oh, I didn't know you were still up, she said, surprised. I just wanted to see you, I replied, hugging her. It's late tonight. She gave me a quick kiss. Yeah, sorry, Jason held us up again with one of those post-show reviews. She headed upstairs, and I froze. I knew from Jason that he hadn't held any reviews in a month. I tried to dismiss it, but doubt crept in. The next day, I asked Bill to have lunch with me, and he agreed, sensing my need for a serious talk. We drove to a quiet restaurant far from the office. After we ordered, Bill broke the silence. It's Mandy, isn't it? His words hit home, and I couldn't hold back. I let out all my fears and frustrations, feeling surprisingly vulnerable. Man, I always thought you and Mandy had the perfect marriage, Bill said, shaking his head. Yeah, so did I replied quietly. What are you going to do? He asked, and his question helped clarify my thoughts. I think I need to go to the station, see for myself. If I'm wrong and everything is innocent, I'll leave quietly. Mandy won't ever know. And if you're right? Bill asked gently. I didn't have an answer. I'll deal with it, but at least I'll know. It's better than this constant uncertainty. He looked at me thoughtfully. And what about Emma? I already thought of that, I said. I'll call Mrs. Hanley and ask if she can keep Emma for a bit longer tonight. She's offered before, so it should work. After lunch, feeling slightly more resolved, I returned to the office. Despite my anxiety, having a plan felt strangely calming. Mrs. Hanley agreed to keep Emma until 11 p.m., and I paid her extra to make it a fun evening for Emma with pizza and games. At 10 p.m., I finally made my way to the station. By that time, there wouldn't be many people around, probably just a couple of camera operators and an engineer. When I arrived, though, I realized my mistake. Jeremiah, the night watchman, was on duty. He recognized me, so getting in was easy, but I had to sign the visitor log, eliminating any attempt at stealth. Evening, Mr. Foster, Jeremiah greeted. Here to see the news? Yeah, I replied, trying to sound casual as I signed in. Jeremiah's sympathetic look caught me off guard. No problems tonight, right? No, of course not, I mumbled, heading toward the studio. Did he know something? As I peered through the blackout curtains, I saw Mandy walk off set. But instead of heading to her dressing room, she moved toward the green room, which was typically used for guests. Mandy opened the door, and a light inside briefly illuminated a man's figure before the door closed. My heart was pounding. If I barged in and everything was innocent, Mandy would never forgive me. But if I stayed outside, I'd never know the truth. Then I remembered Mandy once showed me a small observation window that might give me a clearer view of the room inside. I checked the time, it was already 10:45, and I needed to leave soon to pick up Emma. Peering through the window, I saw Mandy wrapped up in a heated embrace with a man. I recorded the scene on my phone, the dim light catching her black lingerie against her skin. As much as I wanted to confront her right then, I had to get Emma. I hurried out to the lobby, nodded at Jeremiah, the security guard, and made my way outside. Sorry about this, Mr. Foster, Jeremiah said quietly, and I felt a stab of realization. Did everyone know except me? I drove quickly to Mrs. Hanley's place, where she let me in, and I found Emma asleep. I wrapped her in a blanket, thanked Mrs. Hanley, who gave me a concerned look and asked, "Are you all right, Mr. Foster?" Only then did I realize I had tears on my face. "Oh, it's nothing, just something in my eye," I replied. Carrying Emma up to her room at home, I tucked her in, her innocent face contrasting the turmoil I felt. I sat down in the kitchen with a beer, lost in the quiet, heavy with the memory of what I'd seen. My mind flashed back to my grandmother's passing, a memory deepened by the silence. Mandy finally came in around 1 a.m., turning on the light and seeing me sitting there. "Elliot? What are you doing?" she asked, looking surprised. "I've been waiting for you," I replied evenly. "Jeremiah said you came by the studio," she continued, glancing around. "Is everything okay with Emma?" "She's fine, Mrs. Hanley kept her for me, and she's asleep upstairs," I answered. She looked confused. "If you came by the station, why didn't you come to my office?" I steadied myself, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "I saw you tonight, Mandy. I saw you go into the green room with Paul Michaels." My voice wavered. "Oh, that? We just had a quick meeting after the news," she replied casually. I stared at her. "I saw what that meeting was about, Mandy. I even saw your new lingerie." I watched as she shifted uncomfortably. "Elliot, I'm so sorry," she finally said, her tone barely above a whisper. "Are you sorry you did it or just sorry you got caught?" I demanded, feeling my frustration rise. She looked down. "I'm sorry you found out this way." I felt my heart drop. "You're leaving me for him, aren't you?" She dropped to her knees, taking my hands. "No, honey, it's nothing like that. This is just a fling. It'll end soon, and things can go back to normal." I stared in shock. "You're not planning to stop? You're just going to keep on with this?" I asked, barely believing her words. "It doesn't mean anything, Elliot. Just let me have my fun, and I'll come back to you," she replied with a dismissive tone. I stood, anger seething. "You really expect me to be okay with being betrayed?" She got to her feet, her gaze cold and firm. "Elliot, You don't really have a say. I'm your husband, Mandy. If you don't stop, I'll file for divorce. I hoped this would make her see the gravity of the situation. She regarded me with a calculating look. That's not in your best interest, Elliot. You'll lose custody of Emma and most of our assets. The court won't care about the affair, they'll focus on what's best for Emma, and I'll get custody. You'll see her on weekends, maybe some holidays. I felt helpless. You're the one who's cheating, I protested. This is a no-fault state, Elliot. The court won't care about that. Go ask a lawyer if you don't believe me, she said, her tone resolute. As she kissed my head and went upstairs, I sat there, feeling everything: anger, sadness, disbelief. The woman I thought I knew was saying she'd keep on betraying me and expected me to simply accept it. Finally, I dragged myself to bed, my mind racing until I fell asleep, exhausted. I woke early the next morning, going through the motions, getting ready. I thought of all the wild ideas that had crossed my mind: running away, shaking Mandy awake, taking Emma and never looking back. But as I watched Emma sleeping peacefully, I knew I couldn't do anything reckless. I had to put her first. At the office, I must have looked terrible because Bill noticed right away. You okay, Elliot? When I didn't answer, he closed the door. What's going on? I told him everything about last night. Bill sat in stunned silence. She's really asking you to just tolerate this, he finally asked, shocked. Yes, I replied, feeling defeated. It's like she's a completely different person. Bill leaned in, his tone firm. You need to look out for yourself. First things first, see a lawyer. Figure out what rights you have. I don't know any lawyers here, I admitted. That's where I come in, Bill said with a smile. My college roommate is an attorney. I'll call him. He came back shortly, handing me an appointment time and address for that afternoon. The lawyer listened to my story, then explained how things work in a no-fault state. The court doesn't look at who's at fault, they focus on property division and the child's welfare. So, what does that mean for me? I asked. In short, Mandy will get custody unless you can prove she's unfit. You'll have visitation rights, but she'll be Emma's primary guardian, and you'll pay child support, even if Mandy earns more, he explained. What about the house? I asked, hoping for a small reprieve. It's considered joint property. The court typically prefers the child stays in the home. So, she'll likely keep it until Emma is 18. At that point, you can sell it and split the equity. If Mandy takes a job in another market, though? I pressed. Then you could argue to sell the house. But until then, it stays, he replied. Defeated, I realized Mandy had known this all along. Driving back, I felt trapped. Bill took one look at me and understood. This isn't fair, I muttered. She's the one doing this, and yet I'm the one stuck. Bill placed a hand on my shoulder. Don't even joke about doing anything rash, Elliot, he warned. I don't want to testify that you made threats. I get it, I said, feeling the weight of it all. But it feels like she's hanging over me like an anchor. Looking out the office window, I saw a billboard advertising Mandy and Paul as Pittsburgh's choice for the evening news. I pointed it out to Bill, frustrated. I can't escape her, even here. He looked at me thoughtfully. How desperate are you to get out of this mess, he asked. Not desperate enough to do anything crazy, I said quickly. No, I'm talking about a different kind of plan, he said, leaning in closer. We spent the next hour discussing his idea, and while I kept pushing back, asking if it was even possible, the more we talked, the more I realized I was out of options. Okay, Bill, I'm in, I said, feeling a mix of fear and determination. That evening, I picked up Emma and tried to focus on our time together. I kept the TV off, not wanting to see Mandy and Paul on screen. Surprisingly, Mandy came home early, and she put Emma to bed, reading her stories and laughing together like old times. When she came downstairs, I thanked her. She misses you, especially at bedtime, I said. I know, Mandy replied, almost sadly. And I miss her, too. For a brief moment, I thought maybe she was reconsidering. But then she shattered that hope. I'm taking a vacation next week, she announced. Jason suggested it since our ratings are strong. I tried to sound supportive. I'll check with my boss and see if I can join you. No, Elliot. Paul and I are going. "We're tired of sneaking around and want a break together," she said bluntly. I was speechless. She continued, "Mrs. Hanley will keep Emma all week. Just drop her off and pick her up. Here's where we'll be if you need to contact me." She handed me a paper, then kissed my forehead like I was a child, saying, "Thanks for handling everything, honey," before heading upstairs. I sat there, shaking with anger. This was beyond humiliation. Bill's crazy plan seemed like the only way to regain my dignity. I left work early that Friday, knowing Mandy would come home to pack for her trip with Paul. I'd arranged for Mrs. Hanley to keep Emma overnight so she wouldn't witness any arguments or tension. When Mandy's car pulled in, I was already waiting in the living room. Seeing me there, she stopped in her tracks. "Elliot, what are you doing here? Is Emma okay?" "She's fine," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "She's staying with Mrs. Hanley tonight." She looked confused. "Then why are you here?" "I wanted to ask you not to go away with Paul," I told her directly. Her expression shifted to irritation, and she placed her hands on her hips. "Elliot, I told you, I'm having this affair with Paul. When we get back, it'll be over, and everything will go back to normal. You just have to be patient." "What about our vows?" I asked, my voice raw. "The commitment we made to each other, to leave everyone else behind?" She sighed, rolling her eyes. "Those vows were from a different time, Elliot. No one believes that nonsense anymore." "But this is infidelity, Mandy," I said, barely keeping my anger in check. "You're dishonoring our marriage." "If I want to be with Paul, I will," she replied coldly. "This has nothing to do with you and me." I couldn't believe her response. "What about your fans, Mandy? What would they think if they knew?" She let out a short, dismissive laugh. "I don't care what they think, Elliot. In a year or so, I'll leave this city for a bigger market. What people here think means nothing to me now." Her words stung deeply, and I realized just how much she'd changed. I couldn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. "Stop pestering me, Elliot," Mandy said sharply. "I need to finish packing, or I'll be late. If you can't handle seeing me with Paul, then leave now." Her tone was cold, and with a heavy heart, I nodded, feeling defeated. "I'm sorry, Mandy," I murmured, turning to leave. I headed to a local bar, needing a drink to calm my nerves. As I started on my second beer, Bill walked in. "Hey, buddy," he greeted, eyeing me with concern. "How'd it go?" "I don't even know, Bill. You'd have to see it yourself to understand," I replied, feeling a surge of helplessness. "Well, that's exactly what I plan to do," he said with determination. We finished our beers and drove back to my house. Mandy was gone by the time we arrived, so Bill sat down at my computer, typing a few quick commands to pull up the footage from the hidden cameras. We watched as Mandy rejected my pleas and went on about her plans with Paul. "What a heartless woman," Bill muttered, shaking his head. Then he heard her dismiss her fans and talk about leaving town, and his eyes lit up. "We've got her, Elliot. This is even better than we hoped." Bill saved the recordings onto a flash drive and carefully removed the backup copy from the hidden camera. Holding up the drive, he said, "This should do the trick." On the way back to the bar for Bill's car, he insisted I follow him home for dinner. "Ed made a big meal. If you don't show up, she'll be upset," he urged. So, I followed him, feeling a glimmer of comfort in his hospitality. At Bill's house, Ed welcomed me warmly, giving me a gentle hug that was filled with genuine care. Although I barely remember the meal itself, I could feel their concern in the way they looked at me. Later, in their den, we opened a bottle of wine. Ed could hardly contain herself any longer. "I just don't understand Mandy. She always seems so devoted, and now, she's acting like a completely different person," she exclaimed, clearly disturbed. "Success has changed her," Bill agreed. "She's convinced she can do whatever she wants." Ed turned to Bill with a serious expression. "Help Elliot however you can," she said firmly. "I don't like taking sides, but this is just wrong. Mandy crossed a line, and Elliot deserves to keep his daughter." Then, looking at Bill pointedly, she added, "And if you ever get any ideas about straying with those models at the agency, you'll have me to deal with." Bill and I chuckled, but there was an underlying seriousness in her words. We talked late into the night until I eventually passed out on their couch. I vaguely remember Ed covering me with a blanket, her motherly touch giving me some small sense of peace. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the window and a dry, stale taste in my mouth. Bill lent me a toothbrush, and Ed had cooked a big breakfast, which I managed to eat, my appetite returning slightly. After breakfast, Bill took my hand. "Leave everything to me. Just pick up Emma and get out of here for the weekend." "I'll keep you posted," he said, reassuringly. "Bill, I don't know what I'd do without you," I replied sincerely, feeling a surge of gratitude. He waved it off, saying, "That's what friends are for." With a deep breath, I headed home to prepare for one last difficult conversation. I found Paul and Molly Michael's number in our address book and gave Molly a call. "Hi, Molly, it's Elliot Foster, Mandy's husband. Could I come over to talk?" I asked, hoping she wouldn't sense the tension in my voice. "Hi, Elliot." "Sure, come on over," she replied, sounding hesitant, probably wondering why I wanted to speak with her. On the drive, I thought about how to tell her. It's never easy to reveal something like this, especially to someone you barely know. But Molly had the right to know. When I arrived, she greeted me and offered me a drink. "Just water with ice, please," I replied, my throat dry with nerves. She handed me a glass, and I took a steady sip. "Molly, do you know where Paul is?" I began, keeping my voice gentle. "Of course, he's at a TV convention all week." "Why?" she asked, her voice edged with concern. "I'm sorry, Molly, but Paul isn't at a convention. He's with Mandy. They're having an affair down on the coast," I said, trying to break the news gently. Molly's face went pale. "No. That can't be. He loves me. Mandy and I were like sisters, she would never do this to me," she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, understanding her shock and pain. To confirm what I was saying, I showed her the video footage. As she watched, her face reddened, and she began to cry. I reached over, placing a hand on her shoulder, trying to offer some comfort. "I'm so sorry, Molly." Suddenly, she looked up, furious. "That woman. If you'd kept her under control," she stopped mid-sentence, seeing my stunned expression. "Oh, Elliot, I'm sorry. You've lost your wife too, haven't you?" Her words reopened my own pain, and I felt tears pricking my eyes. We sat together, sharing a brief, broken moment of comfort. Finally, she asked, "What are you going to do now?" I explained my situation, especially regarding custody of Emma. Molly, who didn't have children herself, grasped the difficulty of my position. "I never imagined Mandy could be so heartless," she said, shaking her head. "I'm going to file for divorce, but I need to make sure I don't lose Emma," I explained. "It's best if you don't know all the details, just in case." "You're not doing anything illegal, are you?" she asked, her tone concerned. "No, but if I succeed, Mandy and Paul will regret what they've done," I replied, managing a weak smile to reassure her. "What about you? Will you be able to rebuild with Paul after this?" I asked gently. Her expression hardened. "After knowing what they've been doing for who knows how long? No, I can't stay with him. Maybe I'll use your lawyer unless you have another suggestion." I handed her my lawyer's contact information. "Call him on Monday, and let him know we're on the same page," I said. Before I left, I asked her for a favor. "Please, Molly, don't tell anyone about this until you hear from me. It could jeopardize my chances of keeping Emma." Molly looked me straight in the eye and nodded solemnly. "You have my word, Elliot. I won't say a thing." After thanking her, I headed to Mrs. Hanley's to pick up Emma. She greeted me at the door, jumping excitedly into my arms. "Did you have fun, honey?" I asked, smiling. "Oh, yes, Daddy. I had pancakes for breakfast and played with dolls," she replied happily. I thanked Mrs. Hanley, letting her know Emma wouldn't be coming next week. Mrs. Hanley gave me a concerned look. "Is everything okay, Mr. Foster?" "I hope so," I replied quietly, feeling her kind support. As I buckled Emma into the car, she looked around and asked, "Where's Mommy?" "Mommy had to go on a trip, sweetheart, but we're going on our own adventure too, to Grandma and Grandpa's farm." Her eyes lit up with excitement. "Can we see the ducks and the little pigs?" she asked eagerly. "Of course, sweetheart," I assured her as we started driving. I considered leaving Mandy a note but decided against it. The drive to my parents' farm took just over an hour, and Emma napped most of the way. When we arrived, my mom and dad were waiting, their faces lighting up as Emma rushed into Grandma's arms. Mom took her to see the animals, and Dad took our bags inside, giving me a concerned look. He poured me a glass of iced tea, and we sat at the kitchen table. "All right, son, what's going on with you and Mandy?" he asked, worry etched in his eyes. "Let's take a walk, Dad," I replied, knowing I needed to explain everything. As we strolled along the fence, I told him the whole story. He listened in silence, his face betraying his shock and disappointment. When I showed him the video from the green room, he gasped, muttering, "I can't believe it." We stood in silence for a moment, then he pulled me into a tight hug. "I'm so sorry, son. I can't imagine how much this must hurt." When we got back, my mom had been crying. She hugged me fiercely, whispering, "No matter what, we're here for you, Elliot." I spent the evening with Emma, knowing I had to stay strong for her. The next day, I attended my parents' church, finding some comfort in the familiar words and old hymns. That evening, Bill called, and I realized how fortunate I was to have his support. "Are you ready, Elliot?" he asked, his voice steady. "Once we start, there's no turning back." I paused, considering the risks. "Yes, Bill," I replied, feeling the resolve build within me. "Let's do this." The next day, after we returned from church, Bill called with an update, his voice sounding purposeful and steady. I tried to thank him again, but he brushed it off. "Don't mention it. You'd do the same for me if things were reversed." Then his tone shifted, becoming more serious. "All right, Elliot. Are you ready to get this plan into motion? Remember, there's no turning back." I took a deep breath, weighing the risks. Even if things went perfectly, I knew I'd be facing an uphill battle. But Mandy had humiliated me, and I felt I had no choice. "Yes, Bill," I said finally. "Let's get started." Bill's voice softened a bit, sensing my apprehension. "Ed thinks you're doing the right thing, you know," he added encouragingly. "Now, do you have access to a computer?" I chuckled, appreciating the lighter tone. "Yes, Bill, I'm not living in the 1800s, I replied. "Good. I'll call you tomorrow with more information," he said, and I could hear the faint smile in his voice. "Why not just send me an email with the link?" I asked, puzzled by his approach. "I want to keep this private." "Just wait for my call, okay?" he insisted. Early Monday morning, Bill called me with instructions. "When you have a moment alone, go to YouTube and type KTR Special into the search bar. Watch it, and tell me what you think." My parents had taken Emma out for a walk, so I seized the moment, grabbed my laptop, and typed in the search terms. Among the results, one video titled "KTR co-host Mandy White shares her personal philosophy on love and marriage" caught my eye. I clicked, and as the familiar theme music from Mandy's newscast played, a voiceover began. Popular news co-host Mandy White of KTR recently shared her thoughts on marriage and fidelity in a candid interview, the voiceover announced. I felt my heart pound as the video switched to Mandy, captured in our own home, making dismissive comments about marriage vows. Then the voiceover returned, asking, "What are your thoughts on marriage, Mandy?" The video cut to her saying, "Vows are outdated. No one really believes in that nonsense anymore." I realized this footage was a clever mashup of things Mandy had said to me in private. Her dismissive tone toward her fans and small-town life came through loud and clear. The video continued, showing Mandy saying, "If I want to be with Paul Michaels, I will. It's what I want." Finally, the screen shifted to show footage of Mandy and Paul from the green room, their intimacy unmistakable. The voiceover concluded with a chilling line, "Now, viewers are left wondering, who is the real Mandy White?" The familiar KTR news theme played, but this time it showcased an empty newsroom, gradually fading out, leaving me with a strange mix of triumph and sadness. I leaned back and dialed Bill's number. "Well," he answered, almost giddy. "My God, Bill, you're a genius." "This will destroy her career," I said, still in awe. "Not bad, huh?" "I'm pretty proud of it," he replied cheerfully. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of guilt. Did we go too far? Bill's tone turned serious. "Elliot, did she say all those things to you or not?" "Yes, but..." "No buts," he interrupted. "Mandy turned into a selfish monster, and the world deserves to know. You're a good guy, Elliot. If you don't do this, it won't be you who suffers, it'll be Emma. Do you really want Mandy as her role model?" I sighed, letting the truth sink in. "You're right, Bill. There's no choice here." "So what's next?" I asked, Should we start emailing out the video? No need, Bill reassured me. This will spread on its own. I'll tip off a few chatterboxes, and soon enough, it'll go viral. Just sit tight. Over the next week, I tried to keep my mind off things, spending time with Emma at my parents' farm. She learned all about farm chores and even helped my mom with cooking, enjoying every moment. Each day, Bill called with updates. By Tuesday, he laughed as he told me that Ed had overheard people gossiping about the video at work. By Wednesday, the Kiwanis Club was talking about it, and by Thursday, a local columnist mentioned it in the paper, closing with, and the question on everyone's mind, where are Mandy and Paul? When Bill called Thursday afternoon, he could barely contain his excitement. The entire KTR station is panicking, Elliot. They're getting calls from other news outlets, and nobody knows how to handle it. Even Jason Fields, Mandy's boss, is unreachable on vacation. On Friday, Bill directed me to a blog post on Gawker.com, which covered the uproar surrounding the video. The article linked to the video, speculating that there might be some major shakeups at KTR. That morning, I spoke with my attorney to start the divorce proceedings and scheduled Mandy to be served at the upscale resort in Santa Ana where she and Paul were staying. I even called Molly, Paul's wife, to ask if she'd like him served at the same time. No, she replied, her voice steady. I'll handle him myself when he returns. Other local TV stations, quick to see an opportunity, sensed KTR's vulnerability. Bill discreetly informed a producer at Pittsburgh's second-largest station about my filing for divorce, which was juicy news for them. The station verified my filing and even found out where Mandy would be served. They decided to go all in, sending a camera crew and a lead reporter to Santa Ana on Saturday. On Saturday morning, Bill called with more updates. Jason Fields has cut his vacation short. He's rushing back, and nobody's able to contact Mandy or Paul. KTR is in chaos. That evening, the story broke as the lead segment on the competitor's station, a slow news day, except for this. The broadcast began with a shot of Mandy and Paul on the billboard visible from my office window. For days, Pittsburgh viewers have wondered about the whereabouts of KTR's Mandy White and Paul Michaels. We found them in Santa Ana, the anchor announced before cutting to footage of their reporter, Mary Brooks, striding down the beach toward Mandy and Paul, who were sunbathing and oblivious to her approach. As Mary closed in, she called out, Mandy White, Paul Michaels, can you comment on the rumors about your relationship? Mandy's eyes went wide, and she hurriedly tried to cover herself with a towel, while Paul clumsily reached for his as well. Mary's voice was sharp as she continued, what do you have to say about the video that's circulating all over the internet? What video? Mandy stammered, looking confused. The one where you called Pittsburgh viewers rednecks and admitted you were here to have an affair with Paul Michaels, Mary replied coolly. Mandy floundered for words, and Paul tried to intervene, but just then, a man in a suit stepped forward. Are you Mandy White? He asked. Instinctively, Mandy answered, yes, that's me. The man handed her an envelope. Miss White, you've been served. Additionally, your husband wants you to know that the locks on your house have been changed, and you are no longer welcome there. Mandy's face turned pale, and then, in a flash of rage, she shrieked, that son of a... But Paul pulled her away, leading her toward the resort while cameras zoomed in on her oil-slicked, furious retreat. Back in the studio, the anchor appeared, summarizing the scandal. Mandy White and Paul Michaels, found in Santa Ana, now face both professional and personal consequences. White's husband has filed for divorce and changed the locks on their home. We attempted to reach him for a comment but were unsuccessful. They hadn't reached me because I was still at the farm, spending a quiet evening with Emma and my parents. Bill later told me that Mandy, dismissing the lock-changing threat as a bluff, returned to our house with Paul only to find her key didn't work. A camera crew captured her frustrated attempts to get inside. Meanwhile, Molly served Paul with divorce papers at his home, all caught on camera. On Sunday, Jason finally returned to the station, furious. When Paul called to explain himself, Jason ordered both of them to report to the studio immediately. They tried to sneak in through the back entrance, but they couldn't avoid the competing network's news van camped outside. Inside, Jason ripped into them in front of the entire staff. Mandy, livid, shouted, you can't do this. We have contracts. Jason gave her a cold stare. Your contracts have a morals clause, requiring you to uphold certain standards of behavior. And you've violated them. What we do in private is nobody's business. Mandy shot back. Jason, a practicing Catholic, looked her squarely in the eye. Mandy, at church today, the priest spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the sin of infidelity. He didn't mention your name, but everyone knew who he was talking about. Paul scoffed. Nobody cares about us. Oh, but they do, Jason replied sarcastically, pulling back the curtain to reveal the billboard, now defaced with the words, Pittsburgh's choice for the 6 o'clock news is a strumpet. Mandy gasped, and Jason continued, your actions have disgraced the station. You're off the air, effective immediately. Have you ever seen the original Frankenstein? He asked, as they stood in silence, dumbfounded. Well, you're the monster, and Pittsburgh is the angry mob. If I were you, I'd leave town. On Sunday evening, I cautiously drove back to Pittsburgh, listening to reports of their dismissal over the radio. By the time I arrived home, the media frenzy had died down. The next morning, a political scandal overtook the headlines, bumping Mandy and Paul's story to the back pages. When I took Emma to Mrs. Hanley's, she greeted us warmly. I was so sorry to hear about everything, Mr. Foster. I hope you and Emma are doing all right, she said kindly, though she notably made no mention of Mandy. At the office, most people were polite but distant, giving me sympathetic looks but steering clear of any direct conversation. Bill, however, greeted me with a firm hug. You're a genius, I told him. This campaign worked out perfectly. Well, we couldn't have asked for a better outcome, Bill admitted, though he added, of course, we can't ever talk about what we did. Good, I replied. Mandy will figure out it was me behind it all, but I don't want you caught in the crossfire. Later that week, my lawyer called with unexpected news. Mandy had decided not to contest the divorce. Why would she back down? I asked, surprised. She said she'd fight me. Her lawyer talked her out of it, he explained. She wanted to counter-sue for invasion of privacy, but the case would be complicated, and she's not exactly popular right now. As for Emma, Mandy's unemployed and has no solid prospects, so the judge will rule in your favor. What about her threats to take Emma? I pressed. She's leaving town and will give you full custody, he replied. She only wants to retrieve her belongings and have a word with you before she goes. If she signs the papers, you can talk. I agreed to meet her at the end of the week. I had gained nearly everything I wanted. But the truth was bittersweet. What I truly wanted was my life back, the way it was before all this happened. Still, I had my daughter, and I knew that was what mattered most. The next night, I joined Bill and Ed for a celebratory dinner. I brought champagne to toast them, and Emma came along, dozing off in one of their guest rooms while we chatted. As we raised our glasses, Ed smiled warmly. To you both, she said. Elliot, I thought your plan was nuts and could blow up in your face, but she raised her glass at me. You were fighting for your little girl, and she looked at her husband, you were confident you could make it work. So, thank you both for standing by each other, despite the odds. Cheers. Bill and I clinked glasses with Ed, feeling the relief settle in. Before we wrapped up, I felt the need to check on Molly Michaels, Paul's wife. She'd been through so much, and I couldn't help but feel guilty for pulling her into this mess. Paul was the real culprit, but Molly hadn't seen this betrayal coming. I called her, and she invited me to lunch, which reassured me she held no grudges. We met at a quiet little place, and after we ordered, I asked how she was holding up. Not well, Elliot, she admitted. One day I'm happily married to a TV host, and the next, I'm divorcing a man who publicly humiliated me. I know, Molly. It's like a bad soap opera, I said sympathetically. She asked about my situation, and I shared the results of my divorce filing. Good, she said with a fierce look in her eyes. Mandy got what she deserved. What about Paul? I asked. That coward skipped town, she replied, her voice tinged with bitterness. He told his lawyer to give me whatever I wanted. I don't know where he is, and honestly, I don't care, except I still wake up reaching for him. It's hard to break those habits. Are you okay financially? I asked, concerned. Yes and no. He left me with a house, but it's too large and comes with a big mortgage. Paul has to pay alimony, but I can't count on that, she admitted. I think I'll move in with my parents, find a job, and start fresh. I felt terrible for her. Molly was a kind woman who didn't deserve any of this. I asked her to stay in touch, and we agreed to keep each other updated. The final step left was Mandy's visit to retrieve her belongings. Though my anger had simmered down, I wasn't exactly looking forward to it. Still, I wanted to offer some kindness by having Emma there to greet her. When Mandy arrived, stepping out of her rental SUV, she frowned at first but softened as Emma ran into her arms. Tears filled Mandy's eyes as she hugged our daughter tightly, whispering, "Thank you." They played together for a while, and though the visit was supposed to be short, I decided to let them have as much time as they needed. After Emma had shown Mandy her toys and talked non-stop about her week, Mandy suggested she go play in her room for a bit. "I'll be up in a minute, sweetheart. I just need to talk to Daddy first," she said. Once Emma left, Mandy's demeanor shifted, her expression hardening. "So, you used our private conversations to destroy my life and turn me into a joke. How could you do that, Elliot?" I took a deep breath, not wanting to reignite the conflict. "Mandy, I don't want to fight anymore. Neither of us wins if we do." "Easy for you to say," she retorted. "You cost me my job, my family, my future, all to protect your pride." "Mandy," I replied steadily, "think about it. None of this would have happened if you hadn't acted so selfishly. You brought this on yourself." She looked like she wanted to argue, but then Emma called from upstairs, asking when she'd be up. Mandy looked torn, glancing between me and the stairs. After a moment, she went to join Emma. As she packed her things, she kept Emma close, the two of them chatting and laughing. Hearing their voices, I felt a pang of sadness. This was the last time they'd have these moments at our home. Finally, Mandy came downstairs, suitcases in hand, with Emma trailing behind. She knelt down, holding our daughter close. "Mommy has to leave, sweetheart," she said gently. "I'll be living far away, so I won't see you every day, but I'll visit whenever I can, and we can talk on the phone and even see each other on video." Emma cried, clutching her mother tightly, begging her not to go. Mandy lifted her, holding her close, whispering softly, "It's okay, my love. I'll see you soon, and we'll have a great time." She walked over to me, still holding Emma. "Now, be good for Daddy, okay? I love you so much. Don't forget that." With that, she set Emma down, picked up her suitcases, and walked to the door with tears streaming down her face. She waved quickly, got in her car, and drove away without looking back. I held Emma as she sobbed, tears running down my own face as well. I was losing my wife, and Emma was losing her mother. After a while, I gently set her down and tried to lift her spirits. "Listen," I said, smiling, "how about we go to the park, see the ducks, and get some ice cream?" "Oh, yes," she replied eagerly. "And we can feed the ducks our cones too, right?" "Of course," I said, relieved to have a way to distract her, even for a little while. I knew she'd miss her mom, but I hoped that, as a young child, she'd adapt quickly. I just had to trust that I would, too. The next week brought yet another challenge. Late one evening, my boss called me into his office. "You've done a great job, Elliot. We appreciate all you've contributed to the agency," he began, and I could hear the inevitable but coming. "However, this situation with your wife is affecting our clients. They ask about your connection to Mandy, and it impacts our relationships. And, well, KTR is a key media outlet for us." "So, you're firing me?" I asked bluntly. "No, absolutely not. But we do think it's best for you to seek employment elsewhere," he replied, trying to sound conciliatory. "How much time do I have?" I asked flatly. "Take as much as you need. And, of course, you'll have a glowing letter of recommendation." It wasn't fair, but I knew better than to burn bridges. I shook his hand, thanked him, and made my way to Bill's office. "What's up, buddy?" he asked. "I just got fired," I said calmly. "The agency thinks it's best if I move on." "This is nonsense," he shouted, standing up. "I'm going to tell them what I think." I put a hand on his shoulder, guiding him back to his chair. "Bill, you've done enough for me already. Don't risk your position here." He wasn't happy, but he eventually calmed down. We finished the conversation with plans for me and Emma to come to dinner on Saturday. The harsh reality set in as I updated my resume. Mandy and Paul's affair had marked me in Pittsburgh. Everyone liked me, but no one wanted to hire me. It was time to broaden my search. In the end, I found my way back to my old agency in Columbia, where the scandal hadn't followed me, and my big city experience was seen as a bonus. I had to sell our house in Pittsburgh, but despite a decent market, the sale barely covered what was owed, which had to be split with Mandy. Mandy didn't disappear from our lives completely. She began calling Emma weekly, eventually moving to video calls. Face-to-face visits were out of the question, though, as she'd moved to Santa Ana, California. The scandal had a lasting effect on her career, even beyond the Southeast, and eventually, she landed a position teaching journalism at a community college. After reconnecting with my agency in Colombia, I needed a place to live. The agency set me up with a real estate agent, who turned out to be Molly Michaels. We caught up as she showed me properties, and she mentioned how she'd moved to Colombia after Paul left, starting a new career in real estate. She even offered to help find a good preschool for Emma, along with other activities for children. I found Molly's down-to-earth nature refreshing, a stark contrast to the high-maintenance personalities I'd grown used to. We enjoyed a long conversation, and I invited her to dinner to continue discussing options. Eventually, I settled on a modestly priced house that Molly had recommended, a place she said she'd like to live herself. Her honesty and warmth drew me in, and soon, we became closer. Not long after, Molly and I were married, moving into that very house together. My concerns about Emma adjusting faded as she and Molly bonded quickly. Before I knew it, she was calling her Molly Mom, which soon just became Mom. That summer, we took Emma to Los Angeles to visit Mandy. Molly suggested we take the trip, encouraging me more than I expected. Her confidence and maturity reassured me that our family was in a good place. When we arrived at John Wayne Airport, Mandy was waiting. Despite our video calls, I almost didn't recognize her in person, with her shorter haircut and casual clothes. Emma, suddenly shy, clung to Molly, who gently encouraged her to go to Mandy. Emma walked hesitantly toward her mother before running to hug her tightly. As Mandy wiped away tears of joy, she turned to Molly and me. "Thank you," she whispered. We all walked to the baggage claim together, and as Emma got distracted by a store display, Mandy took the opportunity to apologize. "I've done a lot of reflecting, Elliot," she said quietly. "I went to therapy, and I realized how much my ambition changed me. I hurt you both, and I hope you don't hate me for it." Molly and I exchanged a glance before stepping forward to hug Mandy together, feeling a release of long-held pain. After our vacation, I gave Bill a call, feeling inspired. "Bill, you took a chance on me once. How about doing it again?" He sounded puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Quit your job, move down here, and let's start an agency together, Corbin and Foster," I proposed, barely able to contain my excitement. There was a pause, and then he replied, "Only if it's called Foster and Corbin." We laughed, and soon, we were making plans. Bill and Ed moved to Colombia, with Molly helping them find a home nearby. Not long after, we secured our first big client, who leaned in after hearing our pitch. "I want to stand out. You think you could handle a viral campaign?" he asked. Bill and I exchanged a knowing glance, confidence in our smiles. "Yes," I said, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "We can handle it."